So
Okay, great.
notes payable. When you see notes, what should you think?
Okay, so notes payable. So it's like I don't know. It's like you have an invoice that you have to pay.
No.
So
Anytime you see the
yeah.
word notes, think debt.
Okay.
So
If
note,
it is also payable.
yes, even if it's attached to payable, because look at this. Note payable bearing interest at 8% due on demand and unsecured. When you see the words unsecured or secured, notes payable, interest bearing, this is 100% debt.
Yeah, that's true. So it means that they pay back with 8% a year, probably.
Yeah, most likely, yes. That's typically what the interest rate is per year. Yes.
Okay, but due on demand, it means that when I don't know, the bank that issued this note payable wants the money back, can have everything back when they want it.
It depends. Due on
Okay.
demand, yes. It depends on the covenants in the debt, but typically, if it says due on demand, if the company breaches certain covenants, like for say example, they get over a certain amount of debt on this certain note, if they get over a certain amount of debt, they would have to, the company, let's say a bank owns this debt note right here. If they go over, let's say for this example, if they go over 50% debt ratio, and that is the clause in the debt covenants, they could call all of this amount due if they wanted to. So that's just an example, though. In here, it doesn't look like that, but that's just an example, kind of a real-world example.
Okay, so when I say due on demand, it means that, like the word, that they can ask back the money.
Typically, yes, there's some kind of clause in there where they could call it, it's called calling. They could call the note, they could call the debt payable based on what the clauses or covenants in the debt agreement says.
Okay, because like now I understand, because like I saw a TV show that is Succession. I don't know if you know, but they were talking about this. Like they had the debt with the bank. The bank was like, when your share price is under like $100, I have the right to ask back the money that I give you.
Yes.
So okay, it's the same. So they can have all these kind. Maybe it's about the balance sheet, so it can be attached to.
Typically, what you'll see in these kind of situations are the company can't go over a certain amount of debt. They have to have some kind of balance sheet strength, assets to liabilities, some kind of ratio. It's usually 1 or 1.2, something like that. Assets to liabilities. It can be related to profitability, although that's pretty rare. It can be related to other things like that. But those are some of the, typically what you'll most of the time see is it's related to they can't go over a certain debt level. Is most of the time what you'll see. Also, the second most common thing in my experience is they have to keep some kind of asset to liability level. Again, 1, 1.2, or whatever the actual covenants say. Those are typically the most common.
Okay.
So, next word, because this is an important, interest rates, you understand that, correct?
Yeah. Okay.
Due on demand, we just talked about that. Unsecured.
Okay. It means that it's not backed by asset. Like when you ask the loan on home, there is the home that is an asset.
Perfect. So if this would say secured, it may be secured by their accounts receivable, their equipment, their any kind of properties they own, anything like that. When it says secured, essentially is like you said, if they default on this loan, if it's secured, the bank or whoever this is that owns it can take that as collateral. or take that
Oh,
because it was collateral.
okay. Okay. So if they miss the payment, they can like go straight to take that, no? In the contract.
Typically, and that depends too. Typically, there's kind of a grace period. Typically,
No.
if they
The
miss
time.
if they
Okay.
miss one payment, they're probably good as long as they're communicating with the banks. If they miss 2, 3, 4 payments, then they could take it like that if they really wanted to.
Ah, okay. Okay.
And these are both very important terms. If
Mm-hmm.
it said secured here, we would want to
Mm-hmm.
know obviously what the company is securing that loan with. Again, is it
Mm-hmm.
their properties? Is it their accounts receivable? Is it their patents? Is it whatever it is? We want to figure out what that is, and they should talk about that in here. If it said secured, it says it's unsecured, so they won't talk about that in here. This is also very important. A real world
But
example. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
still, even if it's unsecure, uh, like they still have to pay that debts back. I mean, even if it's unsecured, they still it's a debt. So like
Yes.
until they go bankrupt, they have to pay that. No.
Yes, they could still go bankrupt even though it's not secured. Yes.
So, or what is the difference? Like, I mean, the difference from our perspective as investors.
As investors, typically we want to see companies that have unsecured debt,
Mm-hmm.
because if the company, typically banks, especially now, now that we're so far away from the last recession, most of what
Mm-hmm.
you will see is unsecured because the banks are flush with cash. There's no really major risk of default because not a lot of people are defaulting. Not a lot of banks and other corporate entities are defaulting. Not a lot of people are defaulting on their payments in terms of individuals. So most of what you'll see is unsecured. For example,
Mm-hmm.
a perfect kind of real world example is after the last recession, a lot of debt was secured by some kind of asset because banks didn't have as much cash. So this kind of goes in cycles. Also, another reason we want to see unsecured debt when at all possible, outside of kind of a recessionary kind of environment where the economy is essentially going to crap, like it was, 10 years ago. Um, this goes in cycles. So we want to see that, but the only time pretty much you'll ever see unsecured or secured debt when we're not near a recessionary area is if the company has a lot of debt. So the company does that, or the bank does that, because they realize this company has a lot of debt and they are at higher likelihood of risk of defaulting. So they want that debt secured by some kind of asset.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if you see the word secured and it's not near a recessionary and we're not in a recession or near a recession, it's because the company likely has issues paying back, has had issues paying back their amounts in the past, or the bank expects them to have issues going forward. So that makes them more risky, obviously.
Okay. Okay. I understand that. Okay. That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's a good point. Mm-hmm.
another point on this, due
Mm-hmm.
on demand. If we are in an environment again soon, or at any time, I guess, where a lot of banks and a lot of companies are defaulting, this becomes a huge issue, even for people who are paying their money on time, paying their bills on time, have never had any failed bill payments, anything like that. Do you know who Grant Cardone is?
Yeah. Yeah. I know him. Yeah.
Okay. So he owns, I think he said at that time he owned like 1,000 plus apartment units, and he never missed a payment ever. Um, he had loans, apartment loans at a bank that was getting ready to default. And because they were so low on cash and funds, they called his loans due, even though he was never late on his payments. So this,
Huh.
yes. So
Well,
this can be a huge issue, even if the company doesn't have any kind of past
Mhm.
payment
Yeah.
history, because it depends on where the bank is, how stable the bank is themselves, how flush with cash they are, those kind of things. Because depending on what the covenants say, they can, in certain situations, call loans due immediately. He said he was on the hook. He was, I don't think he said how he got out of it specifically, but I think he said he was on the hook for like $32 million. And at that point, he didn't have $32 million to pay the loan back. That's what you're paying the loan off over time for.
Yeah.
So this can be a huge issue if and when we go back to a kind of recessionary environment.
Yeah. But we cannot know the specific, so we cannot know what due on demand it means. Like if there is attached to some condition.
No. Yeah.
Okay.
No. The most kind of information you'll get in here is, let's say this company had 3 or 4 lines of debt out. They would go into detail. Sometimes at bigger companies, they will go into detail at where the banks are, or who the banks are, what the interest rates are, what the credit rating on the debt is, those kind of things. But when it comes to specifically clauses and the due on demand clause, no, we will never know that. Unsecured, that's a little bit different. When they have secured assets under a debt covenant, they will most of the time talk about that in here. But due on demand clauses, no, we will probably never know those kind of specifics in and out, just based on the financial statements at least.
Yeah, understand that.
Okay, so